Sony's been riding high on its exclusives, so much so that they felt it necessary to even destroy these exclusive properties. I know what you're thinking. What are you talking about? Those exclusives that have been coming out for Sony PlayStation have been stellar. They've been dominating the market. They've been bringing in the fan bases for Sony and PlayStation for decades right now. So how could they destroy these exclusive properties that they've been investing heavily in to actually carry the success of their console? Well, this is something we've been seeing all across the gaming industry, where developers have been entrusting their games with people that are not making video games in the interest of the game-playing audience. And I think that's exactly what we've been seeing with Sony these past few years, where they've been hiring people that are mostly there for their special interests, whether it's political activism, whether it's representation, whether it's politics, whether it's just plain corporate interests. But whatever it is, it's been taking over Sony Interactive Entertainment. And this is what we've been seeing happening with PlayStation as games become less about the video games themselves and more about things beyond the gaming scape. And I think this is a thing that has lost the gaming audience for a lot of Sony exclusives. So much so where they're wasting $500 million on properties that barely scrap by 500 people. So when you look at the exclusive market for Sony, it's kind of weird to see them actually falter, while other properties like Stellar Blade are skyrocketing to success. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, where Stellar Blade, out of all the big time exclusives for Sony that have been coming out over the years, this is the biggest one, and it's the one that they didn't take care of or focus on, and it didn't come from the West. And I think that is the most telling indicator that we're seeing from Sony Interactive right now, where they're looking at their most successful properties, and none of them are coming from the West, where most of their exclusives are being made. And I think that is the exact sentiment that Sony is now realizing with games like Stellar Blade, because Stellar Blade is that big hit that they did not predict, did not invest in fully, and did not expect to eclipse all of their other properties. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Stellar Blade is reportedly PlayStation's best performing single player PC port ever. And that is just showing how big of a cultural impact this game is having. And it's just showing out that maybe Sony has a misconception of what gamers want and what they're willing to actually play. And that's what we're seeing right now with the difference between all the Sony exclusives that have been coming out for the PC these past few years, where a lot of these games, they come out with lukewarm responses, and that is reasonably so because a lot of these games have been out for years on end. So it makes sense that a lot of gamers already played it, or the ones that are on PC are not really that interested in playing the games in the first place. Otherwise, they would have bought a PlayStation. And I think that is a sentiment that a lot of people had towards this situation with PC ports of a lot of PlayStation games. But Stellar Blade knocks that overall suspicion out of the water, because this game is dominating on PC, and it did dominate upon its release a few months ago, where you see the numbers are almost doubled and almost tripled that of other PS5 exclusives porting to the PC. And this is just reminiscent of what we've been seeing all across the gaming industry, where a lot of dominant Eastern titles are just eclipsing all these catered Western market games that have been coming out these past few years. And you can just look at the numbers for a lot of the games that it's comparing to. You see Stellar Blade, over 192,000 people are playing it on Steam at one of its peaks. And this is in comparison to Ghost of Tsushima. It came out topping out at 77k. You have God of War topping out at 73k. You have Spider-Man topping out at 66k. You have Horizon Zero Dawn topping out at 57k. And you have The Last of Us topping out at 37k. And of course, that theory that came out before, where people saying most of the people that wanted to play these games already played these games. And I think that sentiment is absolutely true to some extent, but it just shows that the games that you're creating are not reaching a broader audience. It's not going out to the PC audience in a positive way. And this is the opposite of what we're seeing with Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade is reaching that broader audience, and it's just showing that, hey, maybe the systems and the platforms and the way you're developing games are not really reaching out to the main audience that a lot of games are usually intended to reach. And I think that's what happens with a lot of Western games these past few years, where they're just not intended for the gaming audience anymore. They're more of prestige titles. And even with some of these games, which I think these games are amazing for the most part, especially Spider-Man, The Last of Us 1, Ghost of Tsushima, and I think that plays into the reaction that we're seeing, where it's not going to be able to compare to a new game. But I think This is in comparison to some new games as well that have come out, because we do have new games that come out and utterly falter in comparison. You have Stellar Blade's numbers, and you compare it to established franchises like Dragon Age Veilguard, the Assassin's Creed franchise, a new popular franchise that's supposed to be supported by Microsoft, and all these games pale in comparison to Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade is racking up numbers that these games can't even compare to, and it just kind of makes you think, what is happening here? Why is Stellar Blade so dominant? Of course, the obvious thing is that it gives the gamers what they actually want to see from a game. It gives them beautiful characters, engaging combat, storytelling that is easy to follow, easy to engage with, and easy to sympathize with. And I think this is the thing that we often fail to see within the gaming world these past few years, where we don't get these easy-made games that are relatable to the audience anymore. And I think that is a failure for a lot of video games in this environment recently, where they're failing to actually hit a mark that contacts and engages the global fan base. And I think that is the key thing with PC ports. You need to engage the global fan base, and I think a lot of Sony PlayStation games are narrowing their fan base to the Western audience, and even narrowing it even more for the United States audience. And they go even narrow with some of the political effects that they put into the game, where they're trying to even focus on Southern California demographic audience for their video games. And I think that is a failure that we see with a lot of Sony exclusives nowadays, especially the sequels to a lot of the games that Stellar Blade is being compared to. We see this with Ghost of Yote, we see this with Spider-Man 2, we see this with The Last of Us 2. These games subsequently sold less than their actual predecessors, and this is reflective of an audience that is just not interested in that narrowing divide that we see happening in the gaming industry, that is trying to placate an audience of people that simply aren't interested in video games in that sort of way. And I think that is the thing that we're seeing with Stellar Blade right now. Stellar Blade is appealing to the actual gaming audience, and that's why it's getting those gaming audience numbers right there for the global standout. And I think that is the difference that we're seeing right now, where people are looking at this game saying, hey, it's not like those other games. This is made for the gaming audience. It's not made for a political audience. And when I'm talking about political, I'm talking about being made to be entertaining. This is the divide that we constantly see in the gaming world, where games are being created to lecture you. We saw this with Dragon Age Veilguard. We saw this with Assassin's Creed Shadows, Ghost of Yote. These games are created to lecture you about certain political angles, and that is not the case with Stellar Blade. It's there to entertain you, and that is directly notifying the game player and audience. Of course, you see this with design styles of characters as well, where characters are being made to be appealing to the gaming audience. We see this with the contrasting looks of Nier Automata style clothes in Stellar Blade, an Eastern game, and of course Splinter Cell, a Western game, where they have a bulky, kind of manly version of the character, and you see the difference with the Eastern version where it's more feminine. I think this is the situation we often see in the discrepancy between the divide of these two developing theories and styles. And this is what's leading to the massive success for the developer Shift Up, where it has a design style that is entrenched in the old styles that have attracted gamers for decades, and it's not changing, and it's bringing in money, and it's bringing in success. So much so where we're going to get a sequel, and that sequel is not going to be contained to one platform. And this is the losses that we're seeing with Sony, where they can't contain some of their biggest successes because they haven't invested in them as much. And I think that is the situation we're seeing with Stellar Blade 2 as it begins its development process. It's going to be multi-platform, it's going to be on PC, it's going to be everywhere, and that second game is going to sell more than the original. And I think that is the thing that we don't see with Sony exclusives anymore. They don't sell more than the original anymore, because they're making games that are kind of a downgrade from the original. And I think that is something Sony is now noticing with a lot of their own productions in the Western world, where they're looking at their games and say, hey, we have to shift back to the Japanese development cycle, because the games in the West are just not hitting their actual profitable goals that we set for them. And I think that's the thing that we see now, where Sony has a problem with Western studios, and they're acknowledging it, and we're seeing that problem intensify and exacerbate with their new titles in comparison to some new franchises like Stellar Blade that are making a game that is actually accessible to the gaming audience, and it's becoming even more popular than Sony's exclusives. And this is even in the face of criticism from all the game reviewers that absolutely hate this game for not being in the Western style, where it's embracing the Eastern standards of beauty, the Eastern standards of actually engaging combat and making a game for the gaming audience. And it got review bombed because of that. It got criticism all over the journalist circuit, where we kept seeing articles every week criticizing this game, bringing it down, And it didn't matter because the gaming audience is the thing that matters most. And I think that's what the Eastern developers realize and understand about their situation. And ultimately, that's going to bring you a successful title. At least that's what I think. Tell me what you think about the situation. Stellar Blade is redefining Sony, and it seems like it will change the gaming industry, maybe in a positive way. At least that's what I'm suspecting. But you tell me what you think. Like, comment, share, subscribe. This is Wagner Knows Why. Catch you next time.